Hello everyone, my name is Alex Rubio. I'm one of the product managers on the CVAD team. And today with me I have Alan Goldman. He's one of our software engineers as part of the CVAD team. This session is the introduction to CVAD REST APIs. What that means is today we're going to go over some of the aspects to our SDKs, show you the different SDKs we have for CVAD, how to get started with these SDKs. Alan's going to do some cool demos and really easy scripts and examples so you guys can feel comfortable and get started with our APIs and hopefully become more productive becoming a Citrix admin. So what's new? So today we're happy to introduce our CVAD REST APIs are now GA. So they're available on our website. You can go to developer.cloud.com and go to CVAD section and you can see the REST APIs there. They've been in tech preview for quite some time, so I'm sure many of you have already tried them. If you have, that's great. Just know that all the docs, everything that's there today is live and you can go and get started. So what are the big differences between our SDKs between on-premises and cloud? For one, our CVAD on-prem only allows the ability to connect with our PowerShell SDK. Again, these SDK has the commandlets as well that allows you to run and create some scripts. It does provide direct communication to that, whereas our REST APIs, our CVAD cloud service uses our REST APIs, which allows you to connect from any REST client or using our remote PowerShell SDK. And here are some comparisons to help you with that. Some of the changes that we have, or not changes, but comparisons that we do here. The PowerShell and the remote PowerShell SDK are pretty similar. They both, have commandlets. They both require authentication. For on-premises, you can use Kerberos. For Citrix Cloud, we use OAuth 2. Connecting to our Citrix Cloud authentication. PowerShell only runs on Windows, whereas CVAD REST APIs is language agnostic, meaning you can run in C#, Python, any scripting language as well that provides the abuse of REST APIs. You can connect over the internet with it. Anything that, as long as you have port 443 open, it'll allow you to do that. And also you have the ability to integrate with any tool or service that you use today, whether it's for CI/CD or automation or anything else. And on the PowerShell side, you do have the ability to run scripts, but not much create tools around that. So focusing on our CVAD service APIs, we really have four big areas or categories that we group these APIs under. Our orchestration is our main library, which allows you the ability to connect to the CVAD service and be able to create catalogs and manage those catalogs. Pretty much, anything you see in Studio, you can do with these APIs, but this is your main library for creating, deleting, managing your catalogs. Our monitoring API really is exactly what it is. It allows you to create or import and export the data that's on the underlying data for Director, where you use it and allows you to pull that data. We'll get into it a little bit in a few slides. Our image portability service allows you to create and manage images. If you're on-prem and you want to move to the cloud, this API set allows you to automate a lot of those tasks. And if you want to do a CI/CD pipeline, you can do that, and it allows you to do that. And the last one that we have for this section is our quick deploy API set. And what these do is allows you to manage any quick deploy catalog created with our Citrix managed Azure service. So these are a special set of APIs just for that service. So digging in a little bit to the orchestration library, you can see that we have many different types of API sets in here. Everything from delivery groups to managing hypervisors, creating machine catalogs, a lot of different API sets for jobs and batches, and pretty much anything that you can do in Web Studio. These are the APIs that are running behind the scenes to allow you to do that. So there's a lot of flexibility here and a lot of ability to create and manage your own and be able to do a lot of that through automation using asynchronous tasks. Monitoring APIs, or also known as the OData APIs, really allow you to connect and search for usage, logon duration, if you have hotfixes applied to a machine, what kind of performance you're running on this machine. Anything you would see in Director and be able to get that data, you could do it through these APIs. Our Quick Deploy API is a smaller subset of the orchestration APIs, but it does allow you to specifically use anything going through catalogs that are being used part of the Citrix managed Azure. So you can see here from creating or managing master images, getting site IDs, publishing applications, and getting your Azure subscription information. The image portability APIs it's a small set of APIs, but it does provide a great service, which it is to be able to export images that are already created from part of your on-prem, logging into the cloud, uploading these images, and getting them ready for your CVAD service to create catalogs on there. A very important set. Our image portability service was created on top of these APIs, so you know that these APIs are well written and they're being used today as part of our active services. So that was a quick demo and overview. That was a quick demo. All right, so now is when we get to the fun part, which is Alan is going to go through and do some demos and show you how to get started. So if you've never done this, just make sure you listen closely and take some notes. All right, good luck. Here you go, Alan.
Thanks, Alex. Here's the plan for the demo today. First, we're going to create a Citrix Cloud API client and find your Citrix Cloud customer ID. Then, using the API client and the customer ID, we can get a bearer token using the OAuth2 token exchange flow. Once we have the bearer token and the customer ID, we can then find your CVAD site ID. And finally, with the customer ID, the site ID, and the bearer token, we're ready to make some API calls. So let's hop right in. I'm going to start on the developer portal, developer.cloud.com, and we can go under platform to see all the different APIs that are available, and we're going to be interested in the virtual apps and desktops service. Once we're clicked there, we can see all the different groupings of our APIs, the REST APIs, the quick deploy, image portability, and monitor, which is the OData APIs. We're going to be interested in the REST APIs here. So on this overview page, there's a getting started here, which brings you to the Citrix Cloud API page, which tells you how to get the customer ID and bearer token. I'm actually going to click over here to Learning Journey, which also provides that information, but in a little more, just like in a single page here. So if you wanted to, you can just click this Learning Journey and you can follow it through, and it's going to teach you how to tag VMs and update an image and do some other things. But first, we're going to get through these prerequisites. So the first one that we need to do here is to create an API client using Citrix Cloud. And let me show you how to do that. So first we need to log into Citrix Cloud. Just make sure I'm still logged in here. And then in the top left menu, you can hit Identity and Access Management. So normally this is where you would go to add or remove administrators from your Citrix Cloud customer. Here we're going to be adding API access to your Citrix Cloud customer. So it's all controlled in the same area. Once you're here, you just have to name your secure client. You can see I already created one earlier. And then it'll create it and it'll return the ID and the secret here. You can also download the secret as a CSV file, or the ID and the secret as a CSV file. It's really important that you protect these. Don't show it in a recording like I am right now. I'll definitely just go and delete these later. But the client ID and secret, when they're used to authenticate to a Citrix Cloud API, it's all done in your context and the admin who created the API client. So any API calls that are made using this client ID and secret are ultimately traceable back to you. So you don't want to leak this or give it to anybody else. If you're sharing scripts or if you're sharing code between your team, make sure everybody generates their own secure client and uses it for their API calls. So once we have the secure client, then we can go ahead and get the bearer token. So in order to get the bearer token, we need to go through that OAuth 2 token exchange. In order to go through that exchange, we need to get our customer ID. Luckily, the customer ID is actually on the same page that we created the bearer token at. So we can go ahead and copy this, and we can put it into, I'm going to be using Postman to make some REST API requests here, but there's many other tools you can use. You can use curl, PowerShell has built-in tools to make REST API calls. Postman's pretty nice because it has a lot of debugging functionality. So we're going to start with the token exchange here. We want to be sure that we have our customer ID in this URL. And then in the body, using xform URL encoded parameters, but it's still going to be in the body here, we have 3 different key value pairs. So we have grant type, which is going to be client credentials. This is part of that OAuth 2 flow. And then we have our client ID and secret, which I just pulled out of that CSV file that I had downloaded previously. And again, never share these client ID and secrets. I'm only showing you guys so you can see what goes into it. And then we also want to make sure it's a post request as well. So once we have everything filled out, the customer ID, the client ID, and the secret, we can make the request and we can get back our bearer token. Once we have the bearer token, now we can start making API calls to Citrix Cloud. But in order to make API calls to CVAD, we need to get one more piece of information. We need to get that site ID, which is the ID of your CVAD site. So that's going to be step 2 in this doc. So we're going to make a GET request to this CVAD APIs/me API. And this time we're going to put the customer ID in a header, and then we're going to give the bearer token using an authorization header with this prefix, CWS auth bearer equals, and you're going to put your bearer token in right there. So let me show you what that looks like. So first we have the URL, CVAD API/me. We have the Citrix customer ID header with the value. So this time I'm under headers. Last time I was under body, but this time we're going to be putting some headers on this request. And then for authorization, we're going to copy this bearer token that was returned by the first API call. And you see I have the CWS auth bearer equals, and we're going to paste the token right here and hit send. So this API is going to tell everything about the bearer token that was calling. So you can see here's my name. Again, that's the admin who created this API client, my user ID, some expiration times. And then importantly, here is your site ID. This is in an array. If you want to be safe, you can just always pull the first element. You'll only have one site here. So we can go ahead and copy this site ID. Now that we have the site ID, we have the customer ID, we have a bearer token that's valid, we can go ahead and make some API calls. So this doc goes on to publish Notepad and an API and do some other cool things. I actually want to do something different. So I'm going to be using one of these session APIs here, and I want to search for some sessions. This is a little bit more of a complicated API that I want to show for an example here. So all of these API doc pages have a lot in common. So they'll always tell you what the URL is. Here you can see in the URL, this is that site ID that we just fetched. We're going to need to put that here. And then this is a post request. So it also specifies that there's a body. And you can see these are all the different things that I could filter for in this session search. And they share, this is a common body for other search APIs as well. There's also some query parameters available. So we have limit and continuation token. These two are really important. So limit, if you don't provide a limit, at some point, if there's too many objects being returned, if you're doing like a get users call or a get sessions call or a get machines call on a really big CVAD site, at some point you're going to return more than, at some point there's going to be more objects than we can return in a single REST request. So if you don't put a limit here, we're going to figure out how big that is. You can also put a limit here explicitly if you want to control it, if you want to put like 100 here or something like that. Whenever you use a limit, if there are more things to be returned, if we couldn't return everything in that single request, there's going to be a continuation returned in the response. And what you could do is take that continuation token, turn it around, put it on the query on another request, and we'll just pick up right where we left off, and we'll keep returning more of those objects, more of that data. And you can take that next continuation token that's returned by the second call and make a third call, and you can kind of just do that in a loop until you get all of the data, until the return continuation, the response doesn't have any continuation token. So that's what these are used for, very useful. There's some other parameters here. Here's the site ID that's in the path that we talked about. And then for headers, we talked about the authorization, the CWS auth bearer. That's going to be the same that we saw before. And there's also this Citrix customer ID that you need to specify as well. And then this API, further goes on to show what its response might look like. You've got the ID and the UID, and there's a lot of information returned by these APIs. They're pretty verbose. We'll be looking specifically into the session state. I want to see what my current state is for my user. So in order to make this API call, again, I'm going to go over to Postman, and I've got it kind of queued up here. So we've got the CVAD APIs. I need to put my site ID in here so I can grab that from the second API we made. I have a limit of 1 because I know I only have 1 session, but I want to make sure I specify that. I'm going to get my bearer token again and my CVAD customer ID. And then this API needs a body here. So this body is pretty complicated. There's a lot of different options. So another cool feature of our documentation is we have these how-to articles. And this is similar to the learning journey, where it just gives you a really simple example. How do I call this API? How do I just get it to work or do something really basic? So if I want to see the documentation for this API, I could see the how to perform an advanced search operation. And here it's going to give me, oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. I want an advanced session search, not a config search. Here it is, an advanced search for sessions. So here's that same API that I'm looking at, sessions $search. And then here's an example search filter. So this is searching for a user, which is actually exactly what I want to do right now. So I'm just going to copy that, put it into the body here, make sure that I have JSON selected because that's the kind of body I'm going to be using. And then I'm going to replace this with my own credentials. So I've got my body, I've got my customer ID header, I've got my bearer token header, I've got my site ID in the URL. I have a limit specified here as well. And we can go ahead and send this off. And it's a post. It's a post in this case because when we're searching sessions, we have to supply a body. Normally this would be you'd think it would be like a get call. But anyways, we can see that there was a session returned here. It's got an ID, it's got a ton of information. Let's see what my current state is. I don't actually know. My current state is disconnected. Okay, so I timed out at some point here. So there's just a wealth of data and information available through these APIs. Some things to keep in mind, your customer ID and your site ID will actually never change. So you can just cache these. You can put them into your scripts and into your code just as constant variables, so you don't have to do that first step to look up your site ID. The bearer token, you do have to refresh periodically. It expires every hour. So before it expires, you need to be sure that you go and fetch another one. But in that intervening hour, you can reuse this token. That way you don't have to make this get call before every API you call. You just have to do it once an hour. And then most of our APIs look very similar, where they have this Citrix customer ID header, the authorization header. So you actually keep these pretty much constant, and you're just changing what's in the URL, what's in the body, what kind of method it is. Those are the typical things to modify there. So to finish off this demo, I just wanted to show how you could call these APIs with a few different programming languages. So I've got some quick pseudocode. I guess not pseudocode. It's running code, but it's not production ready. We want to, if we're deploying something like this to production, we would want the secure client password to be really secured. We would maybe want it in an Azure Key Vault or some other encrypted location. But in this case, I'm just going to import it from my disk from the CSV file. So to start with, we have PowerShell. I'm going to talk about some of the caveats or some of the interesting things in each of these languages. So we have PowerShell, C#, Python, and JavaScript using Node.js. So starting with PowerShell, all of these are going to have a similar structure. The first step is we're going to get the bearer token, and then using the bearer token, we're going to do that same session search API. So with PowerShell, the interesting thing was the interesting thing was in the body for the search API. We can use this convert to JSON commandlet, but you don't have to escape the backslash for that one. So that was a little confusing. I had 2 backslashes there, which is how it usually looks in JSON. But in this case, it's going to do the escaping for us. So we only need 1. And then the other sort of strange thing was in the search API, $ is a reserved character in PowerShell. So you have to escape it using this backtick here. But once we have all of that set up, we can run this. So first step, it's going to get the bearer token. Same thing. We've got the client credentials here, the form URL encoded, and we got the bearer token. And then we're going to go ahead and call our API. Okay, so here you can see that same ID that I got from Postman here for my session ID. There it is. And then we see the state is still disconnected. I have not yet reconnected to the session. So that's PowerShell. Moving on to C#. This ends up being a little bit more verbose because C# is object-oriented. Some of the interesting things in C# was the way to do the form URL encoded was kind of interesting. You had to create a body that's a dictionary, and then you put the body into this other object, and you can do your post that way. For the response, since C# is object-oriented and strongly typed, normally you would create a C# object, a class, and then deserialize the response into that class. I'm doing it the lazy way here, where I'm just putting it into a J object and then kind of accessing it as a dictionary. I don't get type safety here, but it works great for demos. So same thing here, we're getting the bearer token. Here's some just parsing CSV really quick to get the client ID and secret. Also in C#, what's kind of interesting, we have this HTTP client. You can actually reuse this for multiple requests. It's encouraged to do it that way. So we can actually just set up our authorization header and customer ID header one time, and then we can make as many API calls as we want with the same client, and we never have to specify them again. So a small bit of savings there, but then C# more than makes up for it in their verbosity of making a complex body. Again, this could be an object. I just have it as some dictionaries and arrays here. We take that object, we serialize it, we put it into the body here, and then we can go ahead and make that same API call. So the command to run that is just .NET run, and we should see the same exact output here after it compiles first. There we go, got its token, and ultimately we get the same ID and state. That's all I'm printing out here. Moving on to Python. Python was pretty straightforward. I was actually impressed that it handled the X URL form encoded. That was just the default. So you don't even have to specify anything. You just give it this data object and it can understand it just fine and get you back your bearer token. Again, parsing the CSV and making the post request to filter for the sessions. So we can run that one. And same response. And then finally, I will warn that I'm not a JavaScript expert, but I was able to get something working here using this node fetch library. So same thing, you've seen it before, customer side ID, they're all hard-coded. We come in here, we do the form URL encoded to do our OAuth token exchange, and we get our bearer token. And then we can search for sessions using the filters and ultimately get back our data. So we can, the rest of this is just running that code. So we can run this one as well. A little experimental warning. Try running that again. Okay, not sure what happened the first time there, but second time it did work. So that's it. So as you can see, you can imagine a number of different use cases for all of these different programming languages. Node.js is great if you have an internal dashboard or tool that you want to build some CVAD API calls into. You could have the server, the Node.js server, executing these API calls and then returning something to your UI. Python is obviously incredibly useful tool. It's being used a lot more and more in sysadmin work since it's very similar between Windows and Linux. C Sharp, you can see we can do this in a structured language as well. You could do this in Java. Any modern programming language can hit these APIs. PowerShell, you've probably used PowerShell before with our PowerShell SDK. This is a lot more effort to get working than the PowerShell SDK, but the advantage here is, this works on PowerShell and Linux. This works in PowerShell running in an Azure function. So even though we offer the same functionality through our PowerShell SDK, just going out and actually hitting the APIs yourself can be advantageous in some scenarios. So that's it for the demo. I hope you enjoyed, and please be sure to watch the other sessions that we have that go into more depth and more detail about some of these APIs. Thanks.